February 14th, 1873, 2:14 p.m. Mr. Dietrich will fall dead in the malt room. He doesn't know it yet. But the little girl watching from the window, she's already counted every poisoned heartbeat. The winter of 1873 was not merely cold in Milwaukee. It was biblical. Ice locked the harbor so completely that ships lay on their sides like beached whales, timbers groaning under the weight of a frozen god. The German quarter, 8,000 souls crammed between the red brick temples of Schlitz, Pabst, and a dozen smaller breweries, became its own sealed world. Snow-muffled church bells. Coal smoke hung low, yellow and choking. And in a narrow wooden house on Galena Street, an 11-year-old girl sat motionless at a frost-laced window, counting everything. Her name was Emma Richter. To the priests she was a living miracle. To the old women who still remembered the hex trials back in the Schwarzwald, she was something that should have been drowned at birth. And to the men who would soon be dead, she was judgment wearing a child's pinafore. Emma had been born in the stinking hold of the immigrant ship Wilhelmine during a North Atlantic gale in 1861. The midwife swore the infant weighed scarcely 4 pounds. Skin so translucent the lantern light glowed through her like candlelit parchment. They wrapped her in a flour sack and laid her in a crate of turnips to keep her warm. She never cried. She only opened those enormous gray eyes and stared, at the swaying lantern, at the terrified faces, at the rats scurrying across the beams, as if she were already cataloging the chaos of the world. By the time the Wilhelmine limped into New York Harbor, the ship's doctor had given up, pronouncing her dead 3 separate times. Greta Richter clutched her silent daughter to her breast and whispered every prayer she knew. Hinrich, her husband, a master brewer from Regensburg, simply stared at the child and muttered, "Sie zahlt schon. She's already counting." 12 years later, in the winter that froze Lake Michigan solid for the first time since 1830, Emma Richter had become something the community could not name. She knew the exact number of footsteps from her front door to St. Michael's Church, 1,187 in summer, 1,204 when the boardwalks were slick with ice. She could recite, word for word, the argument between her and Frau Kruger on October 17, 1871, though she had been only 9 and standing 30 yards away behind a rain barrel. And if you gave her any date, say the coronation of Charlemagne or the fall of the Bastille, she would tell you without hesitation that it had been a Thursday. To the rational mind of 1873, this was impossible. To the Lutheran and Catholic souls of the German quarter, it could mean only one of 2 things, the hand of God, or the attention of the other one. Father Kohler, the barrel-shaped Bavarian priest who still smelled faintly of incense and schnapps, had once laid his broad hand on Emma's pale forehead and declared, "Dies Kind ist ein Geschenk des Himmels." This child is a gift from heaven. He said it loudly in the middle of Sunday Mass so the entire congregation could hear. But that was before the winter turned murderous. That was before the first man died exactly when she said he would. February 14, 1873. A gray morning so cold the breath froze in your beard. Emma sat at the scarred pine table in the kitchen, spooning oatmeal in perfect, measured bites, one every 4.7 seconds. Greta moved behind her, packing Hinrich's lunch pail. Black bread, a knob of sausage, a hard-boiled egg. The only sounds were the ticking of the wall clock, the scrape of the spoon, and the distant, mournful whistle of the Kellner brewery calling the men to the morning shift. Emma looked up suddenly. Her eyes, those unnaturally large winter sky eyes, fixed on her mother with an intensity that made the woman's hands falter. "Mr. Dietrich will not come home tonight," she said, voice soft, almost gentle. "He will die at 14 minutes past 2 o'clock. The tin pail clanged against the table. Greta crossed herself so hard her knuckles cracked. "Emma! Mein Gott, what a thing to say!" Emma blinked once, slowly. "He has been drinking from the small brown bottle, hidden in his coat pocket for 17 days. Yesterday he drank 3 measures instead of 1. His gait variance increased by 12%. When deviation exceeds 10% inside 72 hours, catastrophic failure is 98.4% probable. Today is day 17. Hinrich had been lacing his boots by the stove. He froze 1 foot half in the leather. Jan Dietrich was his shift partner. 20 years at the mash tun, hands scarred from scalding wort, a laugh like gravel. A drinker, yes, but no worse than most. Kind, Hinrich said, voice low. You must never speak of death again. Do you hear me? Emma tilted her head, considering. Then she returned to her oatmeal as if the conversation were already filed away. At 2:14 p.m. that afternoon, in the steaming, copper-scented malt room of the Kellner brewery, Jan Dietrich clutched his chest, gasped once, and dropped face first into a mountain of barley. The men said later his eyes were wide open, staring at something none of them could see. Dr. Mayer, the brewery physician, wrote, acute cardiac failure, chronic ethanol toxicity, on the death certificate. But the workers carried the body past the Richter house on the way to the morgue, and every one of them glanced up at that small, frosted window on the second floor. Word traveled faster than the corpse. By nightfall, the German quarter was alive with whispers. Old women lit extra candles before their crucifixes. Men who had laughed at Das Riechenmädchen, the calculating girl, now crossed the street when they saw the Richter family coming. And in the confessional, more than one sinner suddenly found new urgency to unburden himself of old crimes. Hinrich Richter came home that night with snow in his beard and fear in his eyes. He sat his daughter down on the three-legged stool by the stove. Emma, he said, struggling to keep his voice steady, how did you know? She looked at him for a long moment. Outside, the wind screamed around the eaves like a soul denied entrance to heaven. I watch, she said simply. I count. I remember. People are patterns, Papa. They think they hide, but patterns always betray them. Mr. Dietrich's pulse was visible in the vein at his temple. 117 beats per minute yesterday morning. 131 this morning. The threshold for ventricular fibrillation in a man of his age and weight is 142. He had 41 minutes left when he kissed his wife goodbye. Hinrich felt the room tilt. His little girl was speaking like a medical journal written by the devil himself. But, how do you know what you cannot see? He whispered. Emma's gaze drifted to the window, where frost feathers bloomed and died in the candlelight. I see more than you think, she said. Shall I tell you what else I have calculated? No, Hinrich said quickly, too quickly. Nein, Liebling. Some things are not for children. But Emma was no longer a child. Not in the way the world understood children. That night Greta wept into her pillow while Hinrich stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind. In the small room next door, Emma lay on her back, eyes open, counting heartbeats. Her own, her parents', the neighbors', the city's. Numbers danced behind her eyelids like angels and demons locked in eternal arithmetic. And somewhere in the dark, a leather-bound journal waited beneath her mattress. Its pages were filling with dates, times, deviations, probabilities, names, sins measured to the decimal. Because Emma Richter had only just begun to speak the truths that no one wanted spoken. And 3 men would soon be dead because of it. Soft, ominous pianochord. Fade to black. The night Jan Dietrich died, Hinrich Richter did not sleep. He sat at the kitchen table long after Greta had blown out the lamp, staring at the frost patterns on the window as though they were equations he could solve. The house creaked around him like an old ship. Somewhere upstairs, his daughter breathed in perfect 4-second intervals. Inhale, hold, exhale, hold. Exactly 15 breaths per minute, the same as always. Greta found him there at dawn. Eyes red, beard stiff with frozen breath. Hinrich, she whispered. We have to do something. She is slipping away from us. From God. He looked at his wife. Hands raw from laundry, rosary beads cutting grooves into her palms, and felt something inside him fracture. She is still our Emma, he said. But the words tasted like a lie. 3 days later, the lie cracked wide open. Greta was peeling potatoes over the iron sink, knuckles white from cold. Emma sat opposite her, shelling peas with mechanical rhythm, 1 pea every 1.8 seconds. The only sound was the dull thud of the blade and the soft pop of pods. Then Emma stopped. Her small fingers froze mid-motion. Those gray eyes lifted, unblinking. Tomorrow, she said. At 11 o'clock exactly, Mrs. Weber will be discovered. Greta's knife slipped, nicking her thumb. Blood welled bright against the pale potato skin. Emma! Her husband will find her in the brewery office with Mr. Kellner. There will be blood. Mr. Kellner will lose 3 ribs and the bridge of his nose. Mrs. Weber will lose 2 teeth and the sight in her left eye for 9 days. Greta dropped the knife entirely, clattered like a gunshot. Kind, you must stop this. But Emma continued as if reciting a catechism. For 6 weeks, Mrs. Weber has arrived 7 minutes earlier each Tuesday. Mr. Kellner remains 33 minutes later each day. Tomorrow Mr. Weber's mare will throw a splint because the lameness I measured has progressed from 53% weight-bearing asymmetry to 68% in 11 days. The horse will slow the delivery wagon by 47 minutes. The 3 timelines converge at 1100 hours. The probability of violent discovery is 99.7%. Hinrich had been listening from the doorway, coat half-buttoned. The blood drained from his face so completely that for a moment he looked like his own corpse. Emma, he croaked. How do you know what happens inside locked offices? She turned those winter eyes on him. People leave traces, Papa. Lipstick on a collar. A button missing in the exact place a desperate hand would clutch. The way Mr. Kellner now parts his hair on the left instead of the right to hide a bruise shaped like a woman's mouth. Patterns do not lie. People only think they do. That night the Richter house felt like a tomb with windows. The next morning unfolded like a passion play written in arithmetic. At 10:59 a.m. Wilhelm Weber limped into the Kellner brewery yard, cursing the mare that had nearly thrown him twice. At 11 o'clock exactly, the office door slammed open. The screams carried clear across the frozen courtyard. Anna Weber's first, then Ernst Kellner's deeper, animal howl as bones snapped. By noon, the entire quarter knew. By dusk, the Richter family was damned. People crossed themselves when Greta passed. Children were dragged indoors if Emma so much as appeared at the window. At the bakery, the wife of the owner slid a loaf across the counter with 2 fingers, as though the bread might catch whatever curse lived in Richter blood. Hinrich's fellow brewers now gave him the wide-eyed stare men reserve for the bearer of plague. Ernst Kellner, nose swollen purple, ribs taped, sent word through a foreman. The Richters were no longer welcome at any brewery function. Ever. And still Emma watched. Still she wrote. Beneath her mattress, the leather journal grew fat and terrible. Page after page of columns. Deviations in walking cadence. Frequency of confession versus frequency of sin. Candle consumption at the rectory. The exact angle Mrs. Brennan's curtains twitched every Tuesday and Friday at 3:17 p.m. She drew maps, hundreds of tiny ink dots connected by lines, like a spider charting flies already caught in silk only she could see. One rainy Thursday in April, Dr. Friedrich Müller came to examine her. He was the only man in the quarter still willing to cross the Richter threshold. A Berlin-trained physician with round spectacles and a beard like Moses, he believed in science the way priests believed in saints. He sat Emma on a stool in the parlor and shone a lantern into her eyes. She did not blink. Tell me, Fräulein, he said gently, how does your mind do these things? Emma regarded him the way a watchmaker regards a gear. I observe variables. I assign values. I calculate outcomes. Human behavior is 87% predictable once you have sufficient data points. Dr. Müller swallowed. And the other 13%? That, she said, is where free will lives. It is very small, and it is losing. She opened her journal to a fresh page and turned it toward him. There, in her perfect childish script, was a chart titled Father Kohler and Widow Brennan, Correlation Matrix. Dates, times, candle counts, wine purchases, the duration of private spiritual counseling, measured to the second. Dr. Müller felt the room tilt. He closed the journal with trembling fingers. Later, in the kitchen, he spoke to Hinrich and Greta while rain lashed the windows like judgment. Medically, he said, choosing his words with care, your daughter suffers from an extreme form of what the new science calls hyperthymesia combined with prodigious savant calculation. Her brain is a machine made of flesh. She cannot stop seeing the patterns any more than you or I can stop seeing light. Greta began to sob silently. But Dr. Heinrich whispered. She is predicting death. Scene. Fire. People are saying she is hexed. Or worse, that she is doing the hexing. Dr. Mueller removed his spectacles and cleaned them slowly. I do not believe in witchcraft, Herr Richter. But I will tell you this. I have never been so afraid of a child in my life. 2 days later Emma made her most terrible prediction yet. They were eating a silent supper, potato soup gone cold, when she laid down her spoon with mathematical finality. Sunday, she said, 8:47 p.m. The Zimmerman house will burn. Mr. Zimmerman will die inside. The fire will consume 3 adjacent buildings. Response time of the volunteer brigade will be 11 minutes too late. Greta made a sound like a wounded animal. Heinrich stood so fast his chair overturned. Enough, he roared. You will speak no more of this. But Emma only looked at him with pity. I do not choose the numbers, Papa. The numbers choose to be spoken. She opened her journal and slid it across the table. There was a sketch of the Zimmerman chimney, precise measurements of cracks, soot vectors, wind patterns. A second page listed Franz Zimmerman's purchases. 3 gallons of lamp oil in 2 weeks, though his wife was visiting Chicago. A third page tracked the man's gait. Drunken weaving increasing 9% per day. I have warned him through you, she said softly. Whether he listens is the 7% I cannot calculate. That night Heinrich did the bravest and most foolish thing of his life. He went to Franz Zimmerman. He found him in the alley behind the brewery, reeking of kerosene and despair, trying to light a pipe with shaking hands. Franz, Heinrich said, for the love of God, be careful with fire tomorrow night. Clean your chimney. Pour out the lamp oil. My daughter. She sees things. Zimmerman spat a stream of tobacco juice that steamed on the frozen ground. Your devil brat? Let her burn in her own hell. He laughed until he coughed blood-flecked phlegm into the snow. Sunday came warm and wind-whipped, unnatural after months of ice. Church bells rang for vespers. Families walked home beneath a sky the color of old bruises. At 8:47 p.m. exactly, a bloom of orange clawed its way up the Zimmerman curtains. By 8:52 the roof was alight. By 9:03 3 more houses were burning. The volunteer brigade arrived with pumps frozen solid from the winter they had never quite escaped. They found Franz Zimmerman in the kitchen, curled like a child around an empty lamp oil bottle, skin blistered black, mouth open in a scream that never came. The quarter burned with him. When the flames finally died, the German community stood among the ashes and looked toward the small wooden house on Galena Street that still stood untouched. Inside, Emma Richter closed her journal on a fresh page. At the top she wrote in careful copperplate, Prediction April 17, 1873. Confirmed. Margin of error, 0 minutes, 0 seconds. Adjustment to human compliance variable, minus 4.3%. Then she turned to a new page and began a fresh column. Because the worst secret of all, the one buried beneath floorboards and oaths and 10 years of lies, was already calculating its way to the surface. And Milwaukee's German quarter had only begun to pay the price for what one little girl could not stop seeing. Low, relentless piano. Wind rising. A single church bell tolls in the distance. The ashes of the Zimmerman fire had barely cooled when the German quarter realized something worse than flame was coming. It was coming in the form of a child's neat copperplate handwriting. In the days after the blaze, the neighborhood became a city under siege by silence. Doors slammed the moment a Richter passed. Children were yanked indoors by their braids. At night, candles burned late behind every curtain. People praying or watching or both. Heinrich Richter no longer had a place at the Kellner Brewery. When he appeared for his shift, the foreman simply pointed to the gate and said, "Nicht mehr willkommen." Not welcome anymore. The words were spoken softly, almost with pity, the way one speaks to a man whose house has already burned down. Greta packed their life into 2 wooden trunks and 1 flour sack. They would leave before Whitsunday, she decided. West maybe, Nebraska, Kansas. someplace where the wind could blow the fear out of people's eyes. But Emma was still calculating. She sat at the kitchen window from dawn until the gas lamps flickered on, gray eyes moving like the pendulum of a clock that had forgotten mercy. Her journal, now the thickness of a family Bible, lay open on the table, pages dense with columns, vectors, probability trees that looked like black frost spreading across the paper. Greta could not bear to touch it anymore. She had tried once, weeks earlier, and found a page titled simply Mama. Beneath the heading were numbers: frequency of crying at night, 4.7 episodes/week. Weight loss since February 14th, 11.2 pounds. Probability of nervous collapse within 90 days, 63%, 78%. Revised April 29th. She had dropped the journal as though it burned. Tuesday, April 27th, 1873. A day of thin spring sunshine and the smell of thawing earth. Emma looked up from her vigil so suddenly that Greta's heart lurched. "Mama," she said, voice soft, almost tender. "Mrs. Brennan broke pattern today." Greta's mixing bowl slipped in her floury hands. What do you mean, labeling?" 11 consecutive Tuesdays she left her house at 3:15 p.m. sharp, walked 1,187 steps to the rectory, remained 43 minutes, returned by 4:02. Today she left at 2:47. She is walking toward the river. Step length decreased 12%. Respiration visible at 42 cycles per minute. Probability of suicide attempt within 4 hours, 87%. Peak window 5 to 7 p.m. The bowl shattered on the floor. Greta ran into the garden screaming for Hinrich. They found Margaret Brennan on the fishing dock at the bend of the Milwaukee River. Shoes neatly placed side by side. Coat folded on the planks. Ready to step into water the color of old pewter. Hinrich talked for 2 hours, voice hoarse, hands shaking, until the widow was weeping in his arms instead of the river. He brought her home, sat her at his own table, gave her coffee laced with the last of their schnapps. She confessed everything. The loneliness after her husband's death, the comfort she had sought in Father Kohler's private counseling sessions, the shame that had finally become heavier than life. When Hinrich returned home at dusk, Emma was waiting. She did not ask if Mrs. Brennan was safe. She simply turned her journal so he could see the fresh notation.
27. april 1873.
Intervention by H. Richter at 1511. Subject returned home 1844. Suicide attempt aborted. Adjustment required. Third-party interference variable plus 11.7%. New baseline for despair threshold. Revise upward. Hinrich stared at his daughter, at the creature wearing his daughter's face, and for the first time in his life he struck her. The slap echoed like a gunshot. Emma's head snapped sideways. A single red handprint bloomed on her pale cheek. She did not cry. She only touched the mark with clinical curiosity, then wrote a new line. Pain response latency, 0 seconds. Emotional effect, none detected. That night Hinrich and Greta decided they would leave within the week. They would burn the journal. They would drug Emma with laudanum if they had to. They would drag her to the train and never speak her name again if that was what it took to save her soul. But God or the devil had other arithmetic. May 1st, 1873. May Day. The first warm morning in half a year. Emma came downstairs carrying the journal against her chest like a missile. Her cheek still bore the faint shadow of her father's hand. "Papa," she said, "I have finished the master calculation. It explains everything." Hinrich wanted to scream. He wanted to tear the book from her hands and throw it into the stove. Instead he sat because his legs would no longer hold him. Emma laid the journal open on the table. 26 months of observation. 43 primary subjects. 911 variables tracked. At the center of the page was a perfect circle of 7 names written in red ink. Ernst Kellner, brewery owner. Hans Kellner, brother. Wilhelm Weber, delivery foreman.
Otto Steinberg, Mill-Accountant.
Klaus Brennan, deceased February 9, 1873, replaced by Gustav Wolf.
Gustav Wolf.
Hermann Kruger, Lines radiated outward like the spokes of a wheel, each annotated with dates, dollar amounts, routes walked at midnight. Every Wednesday, Emma said. For 113 weeks, these 7 men have met in the old malt cellar beneath Kellner's brewery. Entry via the coal chute at 007. Exit at 1:49. Average duration 102 minutes. Hinrich's mouth went dry. Emma, how? She turned the page. A hand-drawn map of the quarter. Every alley, every lamppost, every dog that barked at the same hour. Tiny red dots marked the paths the 7 men took to avoid notice. They converged beneath the brewery like rivers of guilt flowing into the same dark sea. Then came the ledger. Estimated theft, $47,314.62. Method, falsified production logs, short-loaded barrels, resale through Chicago middlemen. Physical evidence, unexplained ash residue on Kruger's boots matching brewery furnace. Identical ink blots on Steinberg's mill ledgers and Kellner's private books. Weekly deposits at First German Bank every Thursday morning, always $411 to $418. Hinrich felt the walls tilt. $47,000. Enough to buy half the quarter outright. But Emma was turning another page. The worst page. At the bottom, separated from the others by a thick black line, was a single box. Date unknown. Estimated autumn 1869. Location, beneath Kellner Brewery malt floor. Event, homicide. Victim, unidentified male, approximately 35 to 40 years, 5'10", old fracture left tibia. Cause blunt force trauma, skull. Burial, quicklime, depth 1.8 meters. Probability body still in situ, 94%. Emma looked up. Her gray eyes were ancient. They killed a man, Papa. The theft began 6 weeks after he disappeared. The pattern only makes sense if the money was meant to buy silence. And then they silenced him instead. She closed the journal gently, the way a priest closes the book after pronouncing damnation. I have calculated the exact place beneath the cellar floor. If they dig where the rats no longer go, they will find him at 1.8 meters. There is still a brass button from his coat. I measured the rat's avoidance radius for 14 months. They remember. Silence fell so completely that the ticking of the wall clock sounded like a gavel. Greta began to keen, a low animal sound of grief and terror. Hinrich stared at the 7 names in red. One of them, Klaus Brennan, had been Margaret Brennan's husband. Dead 3 months now of consumption. Dead just long enough for the others to believe the secret was buried with him. Emma stood. Her voice was softer than Hinrich had ever heard it. I am sorry, Papa. Numbers do not forgive. They only reveal. She placed the journal in his trembling hands. And in that moment Hinrich understood. His daughter had not simply predicted accidents and affairs. She had mapped the anatomy of evil itself. Every artery, every vein, every hidden clot of sin. And now the heart of the German quarter was about to burst open in the light. Outside, church bells began to ring for May devotion. Inside, a father held proof that would tear his world apart. And somewhere beneath the brewery, quicklime was finally giving up its ghost. Organ note holds, then cuts to dead silence. A single raven lands on the windowsill. The journal was open on the table like a black wound. 7 names in blood-red ink. 47,000 stolen dollars. And beneath the brewery floor, one body dissolved in quicklime that had finally stopped hissing. Emma closed the book with the soft finality of a coffin lid. Ernst Kellner is the architect, she said. He organized everything. He also knows I know. 3 weeks ago he stood outside our house twice, 17 minutes the first time, 17 minutes the second. He was calculating whether a child could ruin him. Tonight he finishes the equation. Hinrich felt the room spin. The man who had quietly banished them from every beer garden, every christening, every funeral toast, was the same man who had been bleeding his own brewery for years and burying the evidence under tons of malt. Emma's gray eyes never blinked. Probability of violent action against this household within 72 hours. 84%. Peak window. Tonight, 047 to 213. Method: fire or strangulation. They will make it look like an accident. They have practiced. Greta made a sound like a soul being torn in half. Heinrich stood, legs trembling, and did the only thing left to a man who has watched God and the devil both lose interest in mercy. He wrapped the journal in oilcloth, kissed his wife and daughter once each, hard, desperate kisses that tasted of salt and terror, and disappeared into the night. He went to Dr. Friedrich Müller. The physician opened his door in shirt sleeves and nightcap, lantern trembling in his hand. When he saw the journal, he did not speak for a full minute. Then he whispered, "Mein Gott, Heinrich, she has done the work of 20 detectives. And if Kellner even suspects this exists, none of you will see sunrise." They planned in hurried murmurs. Dr. Müller would drive them north before dawn. A cousin in St. Paul had written about openings at the Schmidt Brewery in New Ulm, Minnesota. False names. No goodbyes. The journal would stay with Müller, insurance, evidence, a bomb with a burning fuse. At 11:47 p.m. on May 1, 1873, a covered wagon waited behind the doctor's stable. Snow from the last freak April flurry still clung to the eaves. The moon was a thin, cruel blade. Greta climbed in first, face hidden in her shawl. Emma followed, clutching nothing but a small slate and a single stick of chalk. She had burned every other page of her childhood that morning. Dolls, prayer cards, the embroidered sampler that read, "Gott Segen," in faded red. Heinrich lifted the oilcloth package to Dr. Müller. "If we are not heard from by Michaelmas," he said, voice cracking, "take this to the federal marshal in Chicago. Tell them the girl who vanished calculated everything." Müller's eyes filled. "God keep you, old friend. And God forgive us all for being afraid of a child." Emma looked back once from the wagon. "Doctor," she said, calm as winter, "in 193 days the cellar floor will be broken open. They will find the brass button at exactly 1.83 meters. Tell them I was precise." Then the wagon rolled into the darkness, hooves muffled in sawdust, wheels whispering over cobblestones still warm from the day's hidden sins. They vanished from Milwaukee like smoke from a dying fire. No passenger manifest ever recorded their names. No grave in the German cemetery ever waited for them. In New Ulm, they became the Mellers, distant cousins from Regensburg. Heinrich coaxed mashed tons again, hands scarred but steady. Greta learned to smile at strangers without flinching. And Emma learned to hide. She never sat by windows anymore. She wore bonnets that shadowed her eyes. She spoke only when spoken to, and then in the soft, empty voice of any ordinary girl. But at night, when the new house was asleep, she filled slate after slate with columns only she could read, then washed them clean before dawn. Years passed. In November 1873, federal agents descended on Kellner's brewery with sledgehammers and warrants. They tore up the old malt cellar floor at the exact coordinates Dr. Müller provided from a child's vanished journal. At 1.83 meters they found bones, quicklime, and one brass button etched with the initials JL, a missing Chicago cooper who had vanished in the autumn of 1869. Ernst Kellner was arrested in his office, face purple with rage and terror. He hanged himself in the county jail 3 nights later with a belt no one remembered him wearing. Wilhelm Weber was found floating face down in the Milwaukee River, pockets full of brewery ledgers soaked illegible. Otto Steinberg fell down his own cellar stairs with a broken neck no stair could explain. Hermann Kruger died at his kitchen table, cup of coffee still steaming, pupils fixed like a man who had seen judgment arrive early. 3 men dead, 1 in prison. The remaining 2 vanished west and were never heard from again. Every detail unfolded exactly as the girl in the vanished family had calculated from 400 miles away. Dr. Müller kept the oilcloth package locked in his safe until the day he died. Then it disappeared. Some say burned, some say buried with him, some say sent north to a town whose name no one dared speak aloud. In 1875, the mathematics department of a small Minnesota college recorded a special student, female, age approximate 13, who solved problems that made professors weep. The entry ends abruptly. Family relocated suddenly. Destination unknown. After that, silence. Emma Richter stepped off the edge of history as cleanly as she had once stepped onto a midnight wagon. Some say she lived to be very old, hidden in the North Woods, counting stars instead of sins. Some say she died young, unable to stop the numbers that finally turned inward and devoured her from the inside. Some say she never existed at all, just a story frightened immigrants told to explain why their secrets suddenly had a way of crawling into daylight. But in the old German quarter of Milwaukee, when the wind comes cold off Lake Michigan and the brewery bells toll at strange hours, the old ones still cross themselves and whisper about the pale girl with winter eyes who could measure a soul to the decimal. They say if you walk past the corner of Galena and Wasser Streets on a night when the moon is thin and cruel, you might hear the faint scratch of chalk on slate, and the soft, relentless voice of a child who never stopped counting. Because numbers do not forget. And neither did she. Long silence. Then the slow toll of a single church bell. Fade to black.